In 1586, the peace and quiet within the Ayrshire area of Cunningham was shattered by the murder of the 4th Earl of Eglinton, who was a Montgomery. For many centuries, the ruling families, the feudal families of Cunningham, had been fighting a feud. That is, the Montgomerys and the Cunninghams themselves. For instance, the Cunninghams had burnt down Eglinton Castle at one point. The Montgomerys had burnt down Carelaw Castle. There are many other incidents as well. Anyway, it all came to a head when it was decided that the visiting Earl going to Lanshaw Castle was to be murdered by the Cunninghams. This was supposedly organised by Lady Montgomery of Lanshaw, Lady Lanshaw, who was the wife of Montgomery, but was herself a Cunningham from Peacock Castle. And she arranged that either herself or one of her maids would go up to the top of the castle and lay out a white linen cloth, and that would be an indicator to the waiting Cunninghams that the Earl of Eglinton had finished his meal and was about to depart from Lanshaw Castle, heading supposedly up towards Stirling, although one version says that he was heading to Robertland Castle, a local visit rather than a visit called by the king. Now, the result of all this feud was the Earl of Glencairn, who was the Cunningham, claimed that he had no part in it. However, a number of other Cunninghams either lost their lands, were sent into exile. In fact, two of them went across to Denmark, where Anne of Denmark, who married James VI of Scotland, insisted that they were pardoned. The person who actually killed the Earl by shooting him, John Cunningham of Clonbeath, he escaped first of all to Hamilton, possibly to Hamilton Palace, where he was found hiding up a chimney, and he was pulled out and cut to pieces by Robert Montgomery of Skelmley and others. So the actual murder started at the entrance to Lanshaw Castle. This is the bridge over the River Annick, the Annick Water, at Stewarton, just outside the Lanshaw estate. Just around the corner, in fact, are the abutments of the old coach ride, a much later bridge which ran through the estate itself. It's here on the 18th of April, 1586, that the 4th Earl of Eglinton and a small band of retainers crossed the Annick Water and started heading up towards Stirling. It's possible this is the site of the old ford. There's an old wall here, not dating from 1586, but may indicate that this was the way down to the ford at one time. In the background are the remains of the old Lanshaw mill. These are some of the stones from the old Lanshaw mill, one that was famous for having a tree growing out of its chimney. It stands just below the old Lanshaw viaduct, still in use though for trains, Lanshaw viaduct. Here we have a small footbridge across the mill race, that is the ditch that brought the water to the mill. And here it looks as though it might have been where the wheel itself once stood. That is, the whole area here is dominated by this plant. There's the Peacock plant, Tolmeamengasai. Quite close to the Lanshaw viaduct lies the original sluice that controlled the flow of water to the mill. So they've required, the miller didn't want a water supply, he could divert it here, and it would run down through what was at one time an open river course or stream course down to the Annick. Now the actual Annick ford could have been in the distance there where the large tree was, because there's certainly an old lane that runs up into Stewarton from that point, and this bank here obviously has been raised up and originally much lower, so it would be an easy passage. So that's one possibility of the Annick ford. We do know that this lane here, which ran towards the mill and then extended past it, did also run down to the river, but the bank down there seems to be too steep. This is the site of the old Bridgend ford, where on the 18th of April 1586 the 4th Earl of Eglinton was ambushed by a group of possibly up to 30 members of the Cunningham family. The Cunningham family members and their supporters are said to have cut the retinue of the 4th Earl to pieces, whilst the Earl himself was shot by John Cunningham of Clonbeath. He didn't fall from his horse, and the horse carried him down this path here, which was recorded as being the Mourning Path, sometimes known as the Weeping Path or the Widow's Path. The Cunningham members present were not just John Cunningham, but also Cunningham of Course Hill and Cunningham of Robertland. They were husbands to two of the Cunningham sisters from Aycott Castle, and the Cunningham of Aycott Castle was also present. In fact, as part of the retributions, he was killed at the door of his castle by the Montgomerys. Walking down the Mourning Path from Bridgend, where the Earl was killed, his horse would have continued along that path. This is an old weir. There used to be a lade and a small mill across here originally, though later Bridgend mills were built here. This site here was the site of one of Stewarton's golf courses. Games Hill lies above us. There was originally a 9-hole golf course here, and later an 18 golf course briefly. This is a continuation of the Mourning Path running down from Bridgend. Here we have the Cuts Burn. In Scots, the name Cuts can mean a certain number of sheep or a certain area of land. It's not clear the origin, but there is a farm that includes that name further upstream. This is the Mourning Path continuing, also known as the Weeping Path or the Widow's Path. It's not clear what the Earl was doing crossing the Annick Water at Bridgend, where he was ambushed. One version of the tale says that rather than being called to Stirling to see the king, having first dined at Lanshaw, that in fact he was on his way just to Robertland Castle, just a local trip. And he had been warned that there might be trouble afoot. The main versions say that he was heading up to Stirling. So to have come to the ford there, he was either following the valley up, having crossed at the Annick Ford near the castle entrance, or he'd come through the town and crossed over the river at Bridgend, in which case he may well have been heading to Robertland rather than heading up towards Stirling by either the Glasgow Road or via Kirk Ford. This is at Kirk Ford. This is the site of the old Weir, the dam that held the water back and diverted it to flow down towards the Lade, which carried the water down towards Lanshaw Mill. It's also joined here by the Bride's Burn. To control the water, there was a sluice, so any excess water could be diverted back into the Annick Water again. This is also the site of Annick Vale Mill, that is on the other side of the water, and Stewarton's gasworks. In fact, one of the gas holders was on this side of the river, so it lay just inside where these trees are. There is the remains of the low wall that kept people out. And although water now is flowing towards the sluice, in the past water would run the other direction down towards the mill. This is the area of the Mourning Path between Kirk Ford and Lanshaw Mill. The Annick Water lies just to the left. Running along here is the embankment that holds back the waters that used to go towards Lanshaw Mill itself. The Lade, or sometimes called a leat or a mill race. So if you'd been here over 4 centuries back on that day, you'd have seen him passing by, dead or dying, on his horse, down towards the Annick Ford. Now the position of the Annick Ford may be coming down from the town itself, or the old maps certainly show this what once was a lane running down to the river, but the bank on the other side seems too steep. This is the Annick Water at the possible site of the Annick Ford. Although this opposite bank is now raised up, it could be much lower at one time. In the background is the embankment that kept in the waters of the Lade running down towards Lanshaw Mill. And here's the Lanshaw Viaduct. This is the Stewarton side. The bank here isn't too steep, so this could be the access from the Annick Ford running up to Stewarton. This lane here at one time, as marked on the Ordnance Survey maps, now, as you can see, very overgrown. But the top section is still preserved and open, it's not been built over. So maybe at this point here that the Earl's horse came to rest, with the dead Earl's body falling to the ground. His body was taken to Lanshaw Castle before being finally taken down to Kilwinning for burial. This is Peacock Bank Cottage. It was once a curling house where curling stones were kept. The curling pond lying behind it. St Bride's Burn has its origins up in this area. The name Bride's interesting. It could come from St Bride or St Bridget or St Bridgend, which is a saint's name, and is found in places like Kilbride, which is just the other side of Stewarton, and also of course the more well-known West Kilbride and East Kilbride. Now after the murder of the Earl, it was thought at first that Lady Lanshaw, that is the Montgomery, had left the country. Now she was from Ayrshire Castle, so by birth she was a Cunningham. However, instead she took refuge with some tenants up here at Peacock Bank House, which in those days was called Pierce Bank House. Now she stayed here until the hubbub died down, and eventually she was allowed to return to Lanshaw House, but on condition that she didn't show her face beyond the grounds.